Martha Moxley was like many other teenagers of her time, bright, cheerful, and full of life. But one thing made her unique: she loved writing in her diary. Every day, she opened with the words, "Dear Diary," and poured her thoughts onto the page. To Martha, this little book was more than just paper and ink. It was her closest friend, a place where she could confess her secrets, laugh about her crushes, and complain about her teachers without fear of judgment. She wrote about her school days, the boys she liked, her family, her plans for vacations, and even the small dramas of teenage life. But after October 30th, 1975, Martha's diary was no longer just a teenage keepsake. Instead, it became evidence. When detectives began their investigation into her shocking murder, those personal pages turned into something else entirely. Police read each line carefully, searching for hints and hidden truths. Every name Martha mentioned, every detail about her friendships, became part of the investigation. What she had once written for fun was now being used to piece together the last days of her life. Inside the diary, investigators found references to the Skakel brothers, Tommy and Michael, two boys Martha spent time with. She wrote that Tommy often made her uncomfortable, putting his arms around her even when she wasn't interested. She also wrote about Michael, who was loud and rowdy, especially when he drank too much. These small confessions became critical clues, because both boys would soon be at the center of the case. Martha never imagined her diary would be read by strangers, let alone the police, but those pages carried her voice long after she was silenced. They revealed her fears, her frustrations, and the complex friendships that may have led her into danger. In the end, her Dear Diary entries painted a haunting picture of a young girl who unknowingly recorded the shadows surrounding her. Halloween night turns dark October 30th, 1975, just one day before Halloween, was known in Greenwich as Mischief Night. For local kids, it was a tradition. They would roam through the streets, tossing toilet paper into trees, covering cars, and pulling light-hearted pranks. It wasn't about destruction or crime, it was about fun, laughter, and making a mess. For Martha Moxley, who was just 15 years old, it was supposed to be another harmless evening with friends. That night, Martha went to the Skakel house. The Skakels were well known in the neighborhood, not only because of their wealth, but also because they were cousins of the Kennedy family. Martha often spent time with two of the Skakel brothers, Tommy and Michael. On Mischief Night, she joined them and some of their siblings as they piled into one of the family's cars to drive around. Witnesses later said Martha and Tommy seemed especially close that night, playfully spending time together. But soon, plans shifted. Some of the Skakel brothers wanted to leave to watch the premiere of Monty Python's Flying Circus at a cousin's house. Michael was among them, which left Martha and Tommy behind. Around 9:30 p.m., neighbors saw Martha and Tommy together, falling behind the fence. That was the last time anyone reported seeing her alive. By morning, everything had changed. When Martha didn't come home, her worried mother went straight to the Skakel house, only to find Michael hungover, shirtless, and claiming he hadn't seen Martha since the night before. Panic grew quickly. Friends, family, and police joined the search, combing through Belhaven's quiet streets. And then the horror surfaced. A friend helping to look for her spotted a body under a tree. At first, the red-stained hair seemed to belong to someone else, but it wasn't. It was Martha. Her blonde hair was soaked with blood, and beside her lay the shattered pieces of a golf club. What began as a night of childish pranks had turned into a nightmare. Mischief Night would never be remembered as harmless fun again. Clues point to the Skakels. When detectives arrived at the scene, they were shaken by the brutality. Martha had been beaten repeatedly with a 6-iron golf club, so violently that the club itself snapped in two. The blows left a trail of blood from her driveway to the tree where her body was found. This wasn't a random attack. It looked personal, fueled by anger. And then came the detail that made investigators look closer. The golf club wasn't just any weapon. It belonged to a set owned by the Skakel family, the same neighbors Martha had been with that night. It didn't take long for suspicions to focus on the Skakel brothers. Tommy, the last person seen with Martha, was questioned first. He claimed that after spending some time with her, he went inside to work on homework. His tutor, a young man named Ken Littleton, supported his story, saying Tommy was watching television with him later that evening. On paper, Tommy had an alibi, but investigators weren't convinced. Martha's diary soon gave detectives even more reason to question him. In one entry, written just weeks before her death, Martha described how Tommy often put his arms around her, making her uncomfortable. She also noted that Michael, just 15 at the time, became rowdy and reckless when he drank. To police, it suggested tension. The boys were interested in her, but she wasn't interested in them. Rejection could have fueled resentment. The Skakel family's wealth and connection to the Kennedys complicated matters. The children were used to freedom, often left unsupervised while their father traveled. Friends described them as spoiled, prone to trouble, and shielded by privilege. Still, even with the diary and the golf club, detectives couldn't make the evidence stick. Tommy's alibi held up, and Michael claimed he left with his brothers that night. But whispers spread through Greenwich. The golf club linked the murder directly to the Skakels. The last sightings tied Martha to Tommy, and the lies both brothers told cast doubt on their innocence. For investigators, every clue pointed back across the street, to the family with the most power to bury the truth. Years of trials and lies as months turned into years, Martha's case became a haunting puzzle with missing pieces. The police believed the Skakel brothers knew more than they admitted, but their powerful family ties made every step difficult. Tommy, who had been the last seen with Martha, stuck to his story of being home by 10 p.m. with his tutor. Michael claimed he left to watch Monty Python with relatives. Both boys had alibis, but both had lied at different points, which made detectives wonder what they were hiding. By the 1990s, almost 2 decades after Martha's death, the case was ice cold. That changed when a private report known as the Sutton Report was leaked to the media. Hired by the Skakels' own father, the investigators intended to protect the family, but instead, their findings pointed suspicion straight at Michael. In the report, Michael admitted to something disturbing, sneaking into Martha's yard that night, climbing a tree near her window, and spying on her. What began as teenage curiosity quickly turned into something darker, leaving investigators questioning what else he had done that evening. Other witnesses came forward too. Former students from a land school, where Michael was later sent for troubled teens, said he had boasted about killing Martha and getting away with it because of his family's influence. To them, it was more than a rumor, it was a confession. This pushed the case back into the spotlight, leading to a grand jury review. Finally, in 2025 years after the murder, Michael Skakel was arrested and charged. The trial began in 2002, and the courtroom was packed with media, curious onlookers, and those who had waited decades for justice. The prosecution painted Michael as jealous of Tommy, angry that Martha had shown attention to his older brother. With no DNA evidence, the case rested on testimony, confessions, and motive. After weeks of testimony, the jury delivered its shocking decision: Michael was guilty of murdering Martha Moxley. For the Moxley family, it felt like long-awaited justice, but the battle was far from over. Appeals, challenges, and claims of unfair trial procedures soon followed, dragging the case back into years of lies, doubt, and endless court battles. 50 years without justice. In June 2002, Michael Skakel was found guilty of Martha Moxley's murder. Nearly 3 decades after her death, it seemed justice had finally come. He was sentenced to 20 years to life in prison. But that verdict didn't end the story. It only opened another chapter of confusion, appeals, and doubt. Michael's powerful connections, including support from his cousin Robert Kennedy Jr., meant the case was never simple. Kennedy argued the evidence was weak and that Michael had been unfairly convicted, pointing out unreliable witnesses and questionable testimony. By 2013, a judge agreed Michael had not been properly defended during his trial. He was granted a new one and released on bond. For Martha's family, who had already waited decades, this was another painful setback. In 2016, the Connecticut Supreme Court briefly reinstated his conviction, only to later overturn it again. After years of legal tug-of-war, Michael walked free for good in 2018. The state declined to retrieve him, leaving the case unresolved. For the Moxleys, the outcome was devastating. Martha's brother John, now in his 60s, remains the last surviving member of the immediate family. After half a century, he is still searching for answers. Was it Michael, Tommy, or someone else entirely? Did wealth and influence shield the guilty, or did investigators simply fail to prove the truth? Today, more than 50 years after a teenage girl was beaten to death just steps from her home, no one has been definitively held accountable. The story of Martha Moxley is not just about a crime. It is about power, privilege, and the haunting reality that justice can be delayed so long, it almost feels denied.